Hi there, and welcome to another video for my channel Claire Green Media. Today I want to talk about loglines, particularly my formula for writing a logline for a student film. Loglines can be tricky to write because as the creator of your student film, you know everything that's happening in it. You know every little detail, every little camera angle you want to include, every little plot twist and character development moment. But to narrow that all down into one line can seem a little bit overwhelming. Like, what do you get rid of? What do you include? Or even on the other end of the spectrum, we have people who still aren't fully sure about their student film. You know, they've got the basics worked out, but they don't really know everything, and it can be like hard in that sense to write a logline because of that as well. But do not worry, because writing a logline isn't as hard as it might seem. It doesn't have to be the most amazing logline in the world, it just has to get the point across. And if you follow this formula for creating a logline, you should be able to do it with no worries. For those of you who don't know, a logline is a one-liner that describes your student film. So it talks about, you know, the main what's going to happen. It doesn't summarize the entire film. It gives your audience an understanding of what the main focus is going to be and who the main protagonist is. And it also gets them intrigued. You want to make them wonder, oh, what's going to happen? You want them to read the logline and then want to see your film. If they read the logline and they don't want to see your film, then your logline hasn't really done a very good job. So before I get into each of the steps, my formula for writing a logline is written out like this. It looks like this. You have protagonist plus goal over consequence. And that is my basic formula for writing a logline. So when writing a logline, you want to begin by describing your protagonist, your main protagonist. You don't really want to use names here. You just want to describe your character, who they are at their core. So is it a grandfather? Is it a postman? Is it a teenage girl? Just like name your protagonist in the most basic way you can. And that's the starting point. And then what you want to do is you want to choose a couple adjectives to really describe what makes your character unique. So the adjectives don't have to be fancy and you don't need a whole long list, just one or two to really describe who your character is. You can also use conflicting adjectives here so that people are intrigued and they go, hang on, that's very different, you know, I'm interested in that. So my example that I'm doing is my protagonist will be a funeral director, and my conflicting adjective, which will draw in readers' attentions, will be a light-hearted and cheerful funeral director. Now that might not be an actual bad thing or strange thing in the real world, but when you think of a funeral director, it's somebody who you wouldn't initially put cheerful and bubbly next to. So when I say a cheerful and light-hearted funeral director, it catches their attention because there's a bit of a twist there they don't expect. So once you have your protagonist down pat, you've got your protagonist, you've described them with a few choice adjectives, we go on to plus their goal. So here we want to talk about what is the protagonist trying to achieve in your film. All protagonists are trying to achieve something, whether it's a physical thing or a mental thing, whether they realize they have to achieve it or not, whether they choose to achieve it or they have to achieve it. It's something that they are all working towards in your film, and it's something that your film will cover. What is your character trying to achieve? Do they want to fit in? Do they want to find treasure? Okay, so with the protagonist's goal, in my example, I've written, a light-hearted and cheerful funeral director must travel to the underworld to fix a fatal mix-up of souls. Now that we have the protagonist and their goal, we put the entire thing over the consequence. Now you don't have to include this, especially if your consequence is a bit more subtle or not explicit in your film. But what we want to do here is create tension and create some sort of threat. You know, what's going to happen if the protagonist doesn't achieve their goal? Is there going to be some horrible consequence? Is something going to go wrong, or will they simply not be able to get what they want? A good term to use to add this on is or else. you don't have to use this term later, but when doing this formula, I would have protagonist, and then the plus is must, or goes, or has to, or tries to, and then the over symbol would be or else. In my example, I wrote, a cheerful and light-hearted funeral director must travel to the underworld to fix a fatal mix-up of souls, or else face an eternity of supernatural torture. This just puts some risk in there, and it gets people kind of a bit on their edge of their seat going, okay, so now the protagonist has something to push them to achieve their goal. We know why they have to do it. So that's my basic formula for writing a logline for a student film. So protagonist plus goal over consequence. Try this with your own examples, but this doesn't have to end here. This is the most basic logline you can create. And at this point, what we can do is add things, omit things, play around with the structure so that it really reflects your own film. Add things like if you have a major antagonist, or if the inciting incident is super key, you should add them into your logline as well. The main thing is, don't spoil the ending. A lot of people probably try to summarize their film in their logline. We don't want a summary, we just want something that really draws you in and leaves you hanging. In my example, I wrote, a light-hearted and cheerful funeral director must travel to the underworld to fix a fatal mix-up of souls, or else face an eternity of supernatural torture. But I've had to play around with adding and omitting things, and I've made 2 other versions of this logline, which, although different and including different things, you can probably tell it's still the same story. My second version I wrote as a light-hearted funeral director goes on a journey of a lifetime and stands up to Lucifer himself in order to free a soul that has been extremely wronged. And in my third version, I rewrote it as, after a deal with the devil goes extremely wrong, a light-hearted funeral director is recruited by a cynical poltergeist to fix the mess that remains. So those are my examples. Have a go at using this formula for your own student film and see how it goes. Play around with it. Don't just stop with one. Make as many loglines as you can and choose the one you think works best. In conclusion, things to do. Include protagonist, include their goal, and include a consequence. Things not to do is be too lengthy, summarize the entire film, and do not spoil the ending, please. Before I finish up, here are some examples of well-known movie loglines. Take a look at how they follow or break this formula that I've given you, and see if you can recognize the film. Also, why don't you have a go at what we've learnt today? Write your own random loglines for the most bizarre stories you can think of and comment them below. Let's see who can come up with the craziest story. That's all I have for you today. I'll be creating more content like this, as well as some tutorials and reviews in the future. So make sure to like and subscribe and click that little notification bell so you don't miss out. And until next time, bye bye.